and welcome to the Fuzzy Viking channel. So, even though there is an issue that is near and dear to my heart, which is of course feline domination of the world, today we want to speak on another topic altogether. What we are going to talk about today is the politicization or weaponization of something called Me Too. And that's not Meow Too, but it should be called that, I think. But it's Me Too. And what we're going to talk about are three cases. That of Joe Biden, which is the recent news, Vic Mignogna, who is a voice actor in the anime community, and of course Brett Kavanaugh, who was a Supreme Court justice that was undergoing a confirmation hearing back in the fall and received such allegations himself. So let's get started, shall we? I suppose the first thing we want to do is determine what exactly is #MeToo. So, if you didn't know, Me Too was started as a movement in 2006, as you can see over here, on a platform called MySpace. However, it did not become commonly used in the public until 2017, which an actress used the hashtag to talk about allegations of sexual misconduct against a film producer. Now, putting that case aside, of course, what did Me Too want? What was the goal when this actress started this movement and where people started to use it on social media? Let's discuss that for a second, shall we? To be fair, those that support the hashtag #MeToo have stated several policy goals, changes in law, and sorts of things that they want that are far too detailed to go into here. That said, I can list the two assumptions that I see based on how it's presented in social media, which you see over here, that I see that's how it's being presented. So firstly, I do believe they want to change the culture, laws, and policy regarding sexual assault and harassment within our culture. Now, is this a bad thing? Of course not. Obviously, there is much room for improvement in how sexual assault victims are treated and how that we pursue crimes of the sexual nature, and sexual assault, harassment being those things. Obviously, I have differences in how they want to define sexual assault and harassment, and we will get into that later. Now, secondly, I see that they want to create an environment which accusers are automatically believed out of hand, whether or not there is evidence or not. That said, is that a bad thing? Obviously, I do think that is. Yes, we should support those who come forward and say, hey, this person did this to me. But that doesn't mean we should believe them out of hand. We have a system of laws in place for a reason that protect both the accuser and the accused. Now, obviously, sometimes I do see that they promote statistics, if you will, that estimate that false accusations are rather minute. Now, when you look at how they've pulled this statistic, you can see that it's an estimate. It isn't an exact number. And obviously, there are those that believe that false accusations are actually far more prevalent, if you will, than is being presented, and that is a valid point. Let's look at that point for a moment, shall we? Whether or not you believe that the statistics reflect that false accusations are low or high, the simple fact is that there are people within this system, if you will, that are being accused of things that they simply did not do. Now, the system of American law, at the very least, is set to favor the rights of the accused over those that are accusing them. And this is simply put to keep us from convicting someone who is innocent of a crime and give the balance that way. You normally have to prove an accusation. You do not have to prove your innocence. In America, you are innocent until proven guilty. And for most serious crimes, the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, there are people in the Me Too movement who believe that you should not have to worry about a burden of proof, or you shouldn't have to worry about judicial laws or that sort of thing, because we can just try someone in the court of public opinion and convict them and cause them to lose their jobs and their livelihoods and that sort of thing without any recourse or recompensance. So, is this justice? If you really think about it, it isn't. And it does in no favors to either side because it polarizes opinion one way or the other. Now, in a judicial system, the judicial system is focused generally on facts and evidence. And that is something that we seem to be slipping away from. There are a couple other things that I want to go over before we get into the three main cases that we came here to discuss in the first place. Now that said, as I mentioned, we're slipping away from what I think is justice. Now why is that exactly? Because there are many times that I hear people say, well, this isn't a court of law, this is generally really a job interview or an investigation into your employment or that sort of thing. So the rules of innocent until proven guilty and fair evidence and being able to confront your accuser, they simply do not matter. You don't have that right. So obviously when you think about it, what that means is they're trying to remove the ability for someone to defend themselves from an accusation. And that's more of an emotional response than a reasoned or logical one. And it's quite frankly something that is very frightening if you think about it. Now the other thing I want to consider, or talk about if you will, is, as I mentioned earlier, that I do believe that we are pulling away from another thing, and that is the definition, if you will, of sexual assault or harassment. There are many times in which people say, well, he made me feel uncomfortable. He wasn't trying to sexually assault me, or he wasn't trying to be sexual. It's just that he was too close, or he said something that made me feel bad. Well, unfortunately for you, the law isn't concerned with your feelings. The law is about whether or not you experienced actual harm, and emotions are not harm. You are an adult. See, the one thing that I don't understand about the Me Too movement here is this. You know, there is a onus upon everyone involved in a human interaction to assert their rights. No one's going to assert them for you, you have to do it for yourself. It's a simple matter of self-defense. So if someone becomes too close or they make a comment you don't like, you have a responsibility to let them know so that they can correct their action. Now, of course, they do have a responsibility, on the other hand, to try not to be an ass or a jackass or whatever you want to call it to you in their interactions in the first place. But the only way someone will learn what your limits are is if you express them to you. Now that we've discussed the issue of personal responsibility in the Me Too movement, let's look at these three cases that this video is about. So the first one, of course, in chronological order, would be that of Brett Kavanaugh, who was a nominee to the Supreme Court by Donald Trump this past summer and fall. So if you can see his picture up here, Brett Kavanaugh had confirmation hearings that were very partisan in nature, but there seemed to be no obstacle really other than the objection of the leftists on in the Senate to his nomination. There was nothing in his way until at the very last minute, pretty much on the eve of the scheduled hearings, a lady stepped forward with accusations of sexual assault by Brett Kavanaugh that occurred when he was a teenager and she was a slightly older teenager, somewhat about 35-36 years ago. Now, of course, this was far beyond the reasonable amount of time in which any kind of investigation could determine who was telling the truth outside of her word versus his. There were no witnesses that corroborated her statements, and there were no bits of evidence that she could present that would show that he was guilty in any way. She couldn't tell which home it was in or what the location was. She didn't know who was there outside of 4 people she named, none of which backed up her story. And she didn't even know how she got home or even the exact date. She only knew it happened in a certain period of time during 2 years or so. So she wasn't sure exactly when, but she was very certain that it was Brett Kavanaugh as a teenager that had tried to grope her. Now, of course, this was weaponized against him and used to try to derail his hearings. So the confirmation hearings did take place after an FBI investigation, which of course returned nothing because there was no way for them to really investigate this. And he was confirmed to the Supreme Court. His legacy, his work in the public and everything else stained forever by an accusation which could be neither proven or disproven. Now, of course, Me Too would expect you would have to believe the accuser above him regardless of the evidence. Now, is that fair? I don't think so. But there are similarities that we will go on with the next person that we're going to discuss. person we're going to discuss is American voice actor Vic Mignogna. Vic Mignogna has been a voice actor for several Japanese anime dubs in the United States, including for Funimation, most recently the Dragon Ball Super movie Broly, in which he played the title character. Now this is Vic's picture right over here. Now Vic obviously has been a guest at several conventions over the years, and there has been supposedly rumors in which he has been overly familiar, or handsy if you will, with several fans and even some other voice actors. Now, that said, when the Dragon Ball Super movie launched, there was a person who got on social media, Twitter I do believe, and stated that based on Vic's so-called reputation amongst the anime con circuit, it was time that the companies that employed him should start thinking about removing him from the industry. In fact, they started a hashtag associated with Me Too called #KickVic. Now, this has divided the anime community, in which there are fans of Vic Mignogna who want to keep him in the industry and keep him as a guest at conventions, and there are those people who side with the Me Too movement and the Kick Vic movement, and it's caused quite a bit of public, how shall we say, public dispute, anger, rancor, that sort of thing. It's been very divisive. Now, as part of this, #KickVic, Mr. Mignogna has been fired from his job at Rooster Teeth, disassociated with from Funimation, and had several cons cancelled on him, where some have recently started to renew his appearances and that sort of thing. Now, supposedly both of those companies did an internal investigation in which they basically validated the allegations against Mr. Mignogna and terminated his employment. However, according to some of the rumors, those allegations or investigations within the companies were basically being orchestrated by people who were part of this movement who wanted to remove him from the industry for other reasons. Now, as you know, obviously from how I've just glossed over this, Mr. Mignogna claims that there was a bit of weaponization of these accusations for other purposes, which is something that, again, coming to the third person we're going to talk about, they all share in common. So, the last person we're going to talk about is former Vice President Joe Biden. His picture is right over here. Now, Mr. Biden has recently been accused of several women from being overly familiar or invading their personal space at political events in a manner in which made them feel uncomfortable. Now, this is particularly ironic since recently Mr. Biden gave a speech in which he was an advocate for the Me Too movement. And once in that speech, it was expected that he was going to announce perhaps running for president in 2020. Now, that speech, which an Associated Press article was written on March 27th, had a very interesting quote, and I will read it from you. And he specifically stated this. He called on Americans to change the culture that dates back centuries and allows persuasive violence against women. Quote, "It's an English jurisprudential culture, a white man's culture. It's got to change," he said. Well, as Mr. Biden had stated, he was expecting to get support from those who thought that we need to change the culture so that accusers are believed. Now, it's very ironic, as you can see, considering some of the accusations that's been given against them. Now, I had a comment on that article, and I'm going to read that too. So, I said it was very disturbing, and I asked, well, what does he mean by that reference? Does he want to change our system of jurisprudence so that one is not considered innocent until proven guilty? Where accusations are taken as fact and cannot be questioned? Where one doesn't get to face one's accusers in a court of law? Where accusers do not have to prove their allegations, but rather the accused must prove their innocence? Which of these things need changing, Mr. Biden, one would ask? And that said, you have to think about this now in the light of what's going on. Now, obviously, as in with the other two, these accusations against Mr. Biden are being weaponized to try to derail his presidential ambitions. Now, obviously on the right, you see memes and edited videos mostly that project Mr. Biden as a creepy uncle, someone who has unsavory desires or designs on those whose personal space he invades. And his defenders on the left state that, oh, he just comes from another time in which he wears his emotions on his sleeve and he expresses them physically in a way of comforting or supporting those he's talking to. And you can see both sides, if you will, but at the same time you have to wonder, do these things, these claims, have anything to do with protecting women, to changing the culture, or are they being used to promote some sort of other motive or intention? Of course, you see, obviously, those on the right want to derail his presidential ambitions so that Donald Trump doesn't have a viable, if you will, opponent in the elections, and those on the left who are against him more than likely want him to step down or not to announce his candidacy so that those that they do support, mostly women, will have no competition in the Democratic primaries. So obviously, these accusations are not in themselves something that they are pursuing, but rather they are a means to another end. As I had mentioned before, each of these cases have similarities which I have listed here. Now the first one is this: accusations are either years after the fact and cannot be confirmed or proven, or do not rise to the level of criminality, which is the case of Joe Biden. Now the accusations against him have been against the law per se, just that they have made an individual uncomfortable with his proximity or the way he basically touched them without their permission. In the case of Vic Mignogna, accusations were made against him which are the subject of rumors, but no criminal or police reports were ever filed and no corroborating evidence has been presented. In the case of Brett Kavanaugh, the accusations were from a period of time which is over 30 years ago and cannot be adequately investigated, and are also more he said, she said sort of things. And in number 2 here, the similarities. The accused has recently come into the public eye or achieved something that gives others cause to discredit or attack them. Well, in the case of Joe Biden, of course, he's expected to announce his run for presidency in 2020. And with Vic Mignogna, he had just finished his role at Dragon Ball Super Broly, and basically people did not want him to be continuing in the voice acting community. And in the case of Brett Kavanaugh, well, he was being nominated for the Supreme Court of the United States, very important role there. And number 3, the accusations are being weaponized by parties with attempts to achieve a goal outside the accusation that could not be gained by legitimate means. For example, with Brett Kavanaugh, his confirmation hearings were proceeding, and even though there were objections on the part of the Democratic members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, there was nothing that they could present which would stop him from having an up and down vote to be confirmed to the Supreme Court of the United States, until of course these accusations came out at the 11th hour. In the case of Vic Mignogna, his job, I guess, with the Funimation movie Dragon Ball Super was something that caused a bit of jealousy on the part of some, and they wanted him to not have any more appearances at conventions or jobs within the animation community. And with Joe Biden, of course, there are people that definitely do not want him to run for president in 2020. So, the other similarity here is the accusers did not report incidents at the time or attempt to communicate discomfort or non-consent to the accused or authorities. No attempt had been made to adjudicate these accusations within the legal system in none of these cases. And no one took Brett Kavanaugh to court or filed a police report within Maryland. No one's taken Vic Mignogna to court, though I do understand some legal action on his part is being filed now. And in Joe Biden's case, none of these accusers against him have said that they want to file any sort of charges against him. In fact, each of these accusations have been adjudicated within the court of public opinion. In fact, that seems to be the goal on the part of most or some of these accusers, where they would want to achieve goals without actually having to present facts in a court of law. Now, this can be very concerning, and I'm going to wrap this video up by discussing them for a second here. So, as you can see, one doesn't know whether or not to believe any of these individuals, whether or not the things they're being accused of are true or not. There's no way to tell without believing one party or the other. Now, in Joe Biden's case, of course, there is some video or photographic evidence. In fact, some of the people that have been presented in such things have come out to defend him and said that they weren't uncomfortable at all, and others have. But again, none of them have been able to prove any criminal intent on his part, and none of them have said that they felt that he was actually intending to sexually assault or basically touch them in a way which would be criminal in nature. In the case of, Vic Mignogna here, there's been no evidence, in fact, presented to him, or against him, if you will, that would hold up in a court of law. In fact, these things have just been played out where there's been pressure applied to conventions and that sort of thing to keep from hiring him or to terminate his contracts in a manner which is very unfair and doesn't give him a way to respond. And the same thing with Brett Kavanaugh. Obviously, the accusers wanted to continue to keep him from being confronted to the Supreme Court, and even they actually claimed that they wanted an FBI investigation, but were very dissatisfied with the results of that FBI investigation. So they were basically attempting to gain a goal outside of basically punishing or, giving some sort of closure to some sort of crime that any of these three committed. So, let us sum up this video. We talked about Me Too, where it came from and what its purpose is. We talked about 3 recent cases in current political purview, that of Brett Kavanaugh, that of Vic Mignogna, and that of Joe Biden. And as you can see, there are pros and cons to the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement has a valid purpose. We do need to make the system pay more attention to those who report sexual assault or harassment, and we do need to set up a code of laws in which makes it not only easier to report these things, but easy to investigate them. But they must be investigated, and they must be adjudicated with our system, because we must hew to the idea that one is innocent until you're proven guilty. And why is that, you ask? Well, it's quite simple, really. You don't want to be accused of something and not be able to have to prove your innocence, because you can't prove the negative. One must, if they're making an accusation, be able to prove it in a court of law. That's just the way it works. The only way it will work if we have to be fair. We have to make sure that we are not imprisoning or persecuting the innocent, and that we do not weaponize accusations to be used to bring someone down on other pretexts. As you can see from these 3 cases, there's plenty of argument for that. These 3 cases show that accusations of sexual assault or harassment can be weaponized to achieve a goal that isn't adjudication, that it isn't justice, but it's rather revenge, or rather a way of bringing someone down by using this as a weapon. And that's not fair. So, I hope you have some time to discuss and think about this, and please make comments if you like. I'm going to put links below the video of some news articles, that sort of thing, that discuss these things. So please, respond, discuss amongst yourself, and I hope you liked my opinion. Thank you very much for listening, and have a very nice day. Just keep in mind, of course, that when it comes to obey your feline overlords. Thank you.